Even though we all share common threads in our lives, we all have individual experiences. I was invited to speak at an American Federation of Teachers Union back-to-school breakfast in August of last year. There were a lot of teachers present, and at this meeting I introduced a young girl that could possibly end up in one of their classrooms. I want to introduce that young girl to you in the next video.
Hello. I want to paraphrase something from the Bible. I believe it's Haggai 2:9. And it says that your latter days will be greater than your beginnings. And when I thought about this verse, I put something in my last book that I wrote, I Mattered, a Teacher Story. I had presented at an AFT meeting, and I introduced this little girl to the people at that meeting. And I'd like to read that passage to you. It's entitled, What Were the Odds? What were the odds? 9-year-old Frankie's life had never been easy. She'd suffered an inordinate amount of hardship over the years. In fact, if you had told 9-year-old Frankie that 51 years later she would be standing before you with a doctorate in education and authored 3 books in a little over a year and a half, she wouldn't believe you. You see, 9-year-old Frankie was the oldest of 6 children and a product of poverty. She had no dreams or aspirations because she was in survival mode most of the time. She had taken over the role of surrogate mother because her mother was in and out of insane asylums. Her stepfather had deserted the family when she was 5, and she was the only constant in her younger siblings' lives. 9-year-old Frankie had already experienced not knowing where her next meal was coming from. She lived in garages, basements, attics, shotgun houses, and the projects. She was also no stranger to the ground being her bed and the stars in the sky being her ceiling. She had already lived in 3 states, Indiana, Ohio, and Mississippi. She knew about her grandfather being lynched by the Ku Klux Klan when her mother was 10 months old. She had experienced drinking from colored-only water fountains, riding in the backs of buses, and had even been taken to jail by one of her neighbors because her mother had suffered another nervous breakdown, and they locked her mother up. This is what they did in small southern towns like Macomb, Mississippi in the 50s and 60s. In an effort to protect the mentally ill from themselves and others until arrangements could be made to institutionalize them in a mental facility, they jailed them. When they threw 9-year-old Frankie's mother in jail, they wouldn't allow anyone to visit her unless they were a relative. Since 9-year-old Frankie was the only relative in town that was old enough to go, some of the neighbors got together, packed a few articles of her mother's clean clothing, put them in a big brown paper bag, and one of them volunteered to go to the jailhouse with 9-year-old Frankie in tow. When they reached the jailhouse, the bag was thrust into 9-year-old Frankie's hands, and she was guided to a big iron jail cell door. It was unlocked, and she was pushed inside. The sound the jail cell door made as it slammed shut behind her, and the images of the empty cells she had to pass as she made her way to her mother's cell frightened Frankie. She could hear her mother's voice calling out, "Frankie, is that you?" Even before she reached her mother's cell, because you see, even a mentally ill mother recognizes her child's footsteps. 9-year-old Frankie found her mother sitting on the top rung of a metal barren bunk bed with no mattress or covers. As she stared at her mother, their eyes met, and in a brief moment of clarity, her mother looked at her lovingly and said, "Frankie, I love you. Please forgive me for leaving you." That experience will be indelibly ingrained in 9-year-old Frankie's memory forever. Had it not been for God placing compassionate, caring people in 9-year-old Frankie's life, she could have easily chosen a path of destruction because of the environment she had been exposed to. Lucille and Penn Bates, otherwise known as Momo and Pawpaw, never had children and didn't have much in the way of material things, but what they had, they gladly shared with a homeless mother and her 6 children. They instilled in 9-year-old Frankie a spirit of excellence. Whenever 9-year-old Frankie was faced with difficult situations, Momo, who never went to school, would ask, "Can anybody else do it?" And 9-year-old Frankie would reply, "Yes." Then Momo would say, "Well, if anybody else can do it, you can do it too. And if nobody else has done it, you be the first." They stressed education because they felt it would provide 9-year-old Frankie and her siblings with opportunities they never had. Then there was Miss Ann Ramsey, 9-year-old Frankie's 6th grade teacher. This wonderful woman went above and beyond the call of duty. She was one of the most compassionate, caring people 9-year-old Frankie had ever met outside of Momo and Pawpaw. Mrs. Ramsey knew about 9-year-old Frankie's home life. She was already aware that her mother had suffered yet another bout with mental illness and had been committed to the hospital. One day, Mrs. Ramsey showed up at 9-year-old Frankie's home in the projects. Momo let her in and offered her a seat. As 9-year-old Frankie watched in awe, because for some strange reason she always thought teachers only stayed at school. They didn't go anywhere else. The 6th grade was the highest grade level you could attend at William Elementary. Once you completed that grade level, you graduated to Pulaski Junior High School. Mrs. Ramsey announced that whatever field trips were planned for the 6th graders that year, she would be responsible for making sure 9-year-old Frankie participated in it. If it meant paying for a ticket or taking her home after the event, she would do it. It was because of this teacher that 9-year-old Frankie developed a deep thirst and love of knowledge. Because 9-year-old Frankie knew the sting of poverty firsthand, she paid it forward. When the opportunity availed itself, she chose to work with those students that were deemed unteachable and shunned by society. She showed them compassion and gave them hope for a better tomorrow, and they too blossomed. I'm sure by now you know who 9-year-old Frankie was. It was me. Those were my beginnings. But they're not any different than anyone else's, but my story is my story. And so as I tried to do things that I thought was right and make other people's lives better, I suffered some things along the way. And even though it says in the Bible that your latter days will be better than your beginnings, he never said that the road would be easy. And Lord knows my road has been very bumpy, but I still love and want to be loved. And I thank you. God bless. Favorite teachers that influence students' lives in a positive way. Mayor Karen Freeman-Wilson states, "My favorite teacher was my first grade teacher, Frances Butcher, at Banneker Achievement Center. Mrs. Butcher was stern but fair and always showed her love for children and teaching. Her 50-plus years of teaching is evident that she enjoyed helping others learn." Miss Chelsea Whittington, Director of Communication for the City of Gary, states, "My favorite teacher was Mrs. Everett at Ernie Powell Elementary School. She taught me mottos and morals that I still live by today. My most favorite saying that she taught me is, be at the right place at the right time with the right attitude, ready to go to work."